Hey,
Hello.
thank you so much for allowing me to interview you about the spies for the newsletter of the Abbess Garden. To start, maybe could you please introduce yourself a bit, what you do, and what you have been doing in your life?
Well, my name is Nathalie Genet-Rouffiac. I'm an historian, and actually, I've done my PhD on British history, 17th century British history. But being in charge of military archives for almost 20 years, I've also been in charge of intelligence archives, which means that I have a second field of interest, which is special services during the Second World War. And well, I've left the military area to get back to culture, which I belong to because I'm a curator, and I'm now in charge of the Museum of Port-Royal-des-Champs, which is a museum 20 kilometers far from Paris. And it's a very small museum, and yet it's a very important place because it has a special impact on French history,
Yeah,
17th century history.
yeah, I like Port-Royal very much, but I must say that before one of my friend and colleague, Sylvain Hilaire, talked to me about it, I never heard of that place before. And the more I learned about it, the more interested I became because it's so special. Um, I wanted to ask you a bit more about what it is to be the director and curator of Port Royal.
Um, well, it just means having to take care of the whole institution, which is rather specific because you have, in the same time, the museum itself, where you have the collections, especially paintings, and who have been done during the 17th century, but also 18th and 19th century, which is all the memory of Port Royal and what we call the Jansenist issue, because Port-Royal was at the heart of this very special theological and political issue. And the second aspect is that the museum has this characteristic to still be set in the actual place where everything took place. So the museum is in the middle of the park and of Port Royal, where you have both the site of the abbey, where actually the Janshenists were. It's a destroyed abbey. You have only ruins left. But you also have a huge area where you had farmers, gardens, and orchards.
So for those who never visited Port Royal, it's like the abbey is at the bottom of a valley with some wet area and
Well, yeah.
forest around, and at the top you will have a lot of buildings like they were used as for farm buildings but later used as schools and then a museum that were um,
Well, actually, what happened is that the abbey itself was founded in 13th century, so it's a very old medieval institution, and it was under the Cistercian rule, and it's an institution for women, for nuns. Um, in this case, the Cistercians they always like wet places,
okay.
so they are at the bottom of near the bank of the Rodon, which is the little river in the Valley de Chevreuse. And here you have the first abbey, who was founded and remained there till 17th century. And by then, it had become so difficult to live there because it was so wet that the nuns for some time moved to Paris and they had a second house in Paris. So that for those who know about Port Royal, you have always Port Royal des Champs and Port Royal de Paris. They became separate, but at some point it was just two houses for the same community. And so the at some point, and the abbey was the owner of fields all around the area, and including the top of the hill
Yeah.
where you had actually farmers. At some point, the religious, because the situation was became critical, the health conditions of the nuns became too bad, so they moved to Paris and they left the place to men who were often relatives, even close relatives, because some of them were actually just the brothers of the
Abbess.
abbot,
Yeah.
and they took care of the abbey and started to introduce new techniques for gardening, and also to get rid of all this wetness. And because thanks to them, the site became much more healthy, and the nuns were able to come back by 1648. And then the men who had been there not only because for gardening, but for spiritual reason, because they find there what they call a desert, where they could find God and serenity of mind, and they could write, and they could also take care of children, etc. They moved to the hill, and they had new houses built, first for themselves, which were very small and very austere lodgings, but also they had a new house built, which was a little school for the boys, but also sometimes for little girls, but mainly for boys, where they had new techniques and new pedagogic interests, very far from what the Jesuits did at the same period, and somewhere in between classical tradition and what we may have nowadays with Montessori, by example. And these things happen in the what we now call the Les Granges, and the house who was built for the Petites Écoles remained there. It was after the French Revolution. It was bought by a family who was still close to the Jansenist tradition. They had new buildings added to the 17th century building, and the whole thing was bought by state and became the museum. The abbey itself remained on the bottom next to the river, but because of the their opposition to the king's authority and even the pope's authority, the abbey was destroyed. First was closed and then was destroyed, and there's only ruins remaining, except for one or two buildings, like what we call a pigeonnier. Sorry, for a dove house. I don't remember how you say a pigeonnier in English. And this round building where you have doves and pigeons, and this is the only thing that remain of the actual site. But yet the ruins and the building on the top of the hill are still part of the what we call the museum area, even if you have the actual building of the museum and all the park around it.
The park is really great. For me, what interested me a lot about this place is that I've been working with monuments previously, but quite often the monuments before the Industrial Revolution, they were created with a special landscape around nature that was quite often destroyed or removed, at least partly. Even Versailles, the domain is reduced compared to what it was. But it's clearly not the worst. For instance, I'm thinking of the Château de Maison, where everywhere around is like suburbs now. And so I was finding it very hard to show the monuments the way they were without the surroundings. And Port-Royal is like completely the opposite, because you have the surroundings. It's not exactly the same because obviously nature evolves.
It's rather funny because nature itself and the landscape has not changed much. What has changed is the way we see it, because by the time they found them, both the nuns and the Messieurs de Port-Royal, what they wanted to find them was isolation. And also, Madame de Sévigné, who was a familiar to the abbey, went there and she said, "Oh, it's an awful valley, and it's so difficult. And there's a huge contradiction between what they felt, which was a difficult place where to live, and what we see, which is it's a wonderful nature and a
Yeah.
wonderful landscape. So sometimes for people now, it's difficult to understand that they were not there because of the beauty of nature. They were there because nature provided them with tough conditions, was a way to elevate your soul. So
Yeah.
it's quite the opposite of what we may think, just because it's nature, good-looking
Yeah.
nature,
Yeah,
wonderful
it's
nature and
the idea
meditation.
of
It's quite the
wilderness.
opposite.
Yeah, it might seem weird for people to hear they call it a desert. A
Sorry, I
desert.
couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. So I think indeed, it's what's interesting is that it was wild for them,
Yeah,
wilderness. And when they mean desert, no, not desert like the end of the course, but
desert,
like
desert.
yeah, it's not the current meaning that we think. It's not sandy, very dry, empty area. It means more wilderness actually.
Yeah,
And but I think the other thing that make it very hard for us to see nature, but also places the way they did, is also the level of spirituality. Obviously, we don't see God everywhere. Even for people who believe in God, believing in God today is not like they used to, especially in Port-Royal where they were such strong in their faith.
Finding God was the heart of everything at Port Royal, and for at least three reasons. First, you have to remember that it was an abbey, where it should be the place where to look for God. The second reason is 17th century is a very religious period, and in 17th century, in 18th century, you start to have people who don't believe in God and say it. Till 17th century. Everybody has faith, and God and religious issues are in the heart of everything. Sometimes, because we are contemporary minds, we looking for political reasons in the way they behaved, but actually their first move was religious issues.
Yeah.
So that's the second reason. And the third reason is that even on a religious period and on an institution where the heart of everything is looking for God, they had a special way of thinking of it. The nuns, because with the Mère Angélique, were part of what we call Catholic Counter-Reformation, which is a move after the Council of Tridentin, where because all what had happened in the Catholic Church at the end of the Middle Ages had helped the Protestantism to grow, Catholics themselves tried to reform the Catholic Church and getting back to more charity, more austerity, and things like that. So even the first abbey of 17th century, Mère Angélique, she was deep in that movement. And from that movement, they went much further than anyone else in the Counter-Reformation, and they developed a new understanding of what could save you. And the idea was two main things. First, you have to renounce the world. So going to Port-Royal was a good way to do it. And the other things, and sometimes that's the reason why people think they were Protestants, which actually they were not. But the idea is that not everybody is going to be saved. This is a period where we are very far from once again, from contemporary understanding we have that everybody is going to go to paradise, whatever happened. Just there, they think that not even the good people are all going to be saved. And that's the first thing. And why the Jesuits think, well, if you behave well, you will be saved. They say, that's not enough. You have to give yourself to the grace of God. And the grace of God is only given by God, and not everybody has it. And so the main question for them is, am I given the grace? Am I going to be saved? So you had to behave according to the fact that you wanted to be saved. So you had to behave well. And yet, you were not totally sure that actually you were going to be saved. That's the heart of everything, which is that they have something which is letting yourself into the love of God, and yet it's not enough, and you still have the fair. So
Yeah.
it's a mixture of renouncement to yourself, and yet anxiety.
Yeah, it's quite tough actually, but I read a bit about Jansenism. It's quite specific. I'm not sure everyone is aware of that, but thank you for explaining it so clearly. So to go back to the spy thing, so the game, the Abbess Garden, we
Mm-hmm.
wanted to have a nice story. So it's part fictional, but it's also part history because obviously Port-Royal was quite connected to the high society of the time,
Yeah.
with Versailles and but also other courts. And there was one
Not
spy.
Versailles. You have to remember that the court of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
king moved
you're
to
right.
Versailles only in 1674.
Yeah, it's a bit later.
So
Yeah,
it's quite late in the in. But before that, they were in Saint-Germain-en-Laye mainly, and in
okay.
Paris itself.
Yeah,
Versailles is only at the end of the period.
yeah, you're right. Sorry about that. Thanks for correcting.
No,
But
we all do the mistake. We all very spontaneously say,
yeah,
"Oh, it's very close to Versailles." But at the beginning of
yeah.
the history of the Jansenism and of your game,
Hmm.
Versailles is not yet Versailles.
Yeah, it's coming later. And so the idea is that there was a British spy, that is an historical one, John Cecil, that maybe you can tell us a bit about, that at the end of his life died in Paris because he was working for a princess there. And there was, I think, its nephew that he sent to get back his heritage in Paris. And he hired one of the best lawyers of the time, supposedly, that is Antoine Lemaitre, which is also, if I'm correct, the nephew of the abbess.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. What happened is that once again, so you have to go back to history. You remember that this time we moved to England.
Yeah.
You remember that in the second part of 16th century, sorry, England became Protestant, and the king was Protestant. And not only that, but the anti-Catholicism became very, very strong in England, and especially during Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I herself would have been kind to and eager to have a tolerant position on religious matters because she was more tolerant herself. But by the time the Pope and its ally, the Spanish kingdom, decided that you couldn't allow a country like England to be Protestant and to be away from Catholic Church. And the Pope took a decision that had a huge impact, which is to say that all the Catholics in England were not anymore subjected to or supposed to obey their own king or queen. And because of that, all the Catholics in the British Isles, not only in England but also in Scotland and even more in Ireland, became suspicious for the king and the queen in England, and so they had to be under special supervision, and most of the Catholic by then decided to move to the continent where they had institution created. So you had exiles, Catholic exiles all around the coast from Flanders to Spain, a lot in France, and you had Catholic institutions, and all of them were plotting to have a Catholic the Catholic king in England, or at least to try to find a way to have the actual sovereign in England become Catholic. And because of that, you have the Queen Elizabeth I, but it remains throughout 17th and even 18th century. They had a special office who was in charge of spying the Catholics. And the best way to spy the Catholics is to hide Catholics to spy other Catholics. And because the position of the Catholics on the continent was so difficult, because they were exiled, which means poor condition, and when it comes to the law in the continent, they were not equal to the citizens there or to the other side, and because of that, they were fragile. And for spying, fragile people are a good field to be recruited for spying, and that's what happened with the uncle John Cecil, who was sent to get in the Catholic milieu, and there try to get as many information and as he could to get it back to London. So that's how he got involved in the spying. Mm-hmm. And obviously, when he died, I think his son wanted to get there to get the heritage, but he died. And when someone from another country died in France, he was submitted what we call le droit d'aubaine, which means all his belonging belonged to the King of France.
Convenient.
So when I say that all the exiles were in a very fragile position, it's one of the reasons why they were in such a fragile position, because if they died in France, everything belonging to them became possession of the King of France. So that's the reason why Francis Jenkins had to go to France, find a lawyer, and try to introduce a special asking from the king to the King of France to have the droit d'aubaine suppressed, so that he could get the heritage, the heritage of his family. So that's the trick. The idea is not to have everything getting to the French king.
And so Sylvain, so my colleague who is a historian as well, and is more specialist of landscaped gardens than spies, clearly, but he told me that there was a doubt that the son of John Cecil or his nephew was actually just a spy and someone completely unrelated, and that his grandson, Francis Jenkins, also was absolutely not related to the family, but might have also been a spy.
No, I don't believe that. Because it doesn't work this way. It means to be a spy. The idea for what we know in 20th century, which is professional spies, you have nothing of the kind in 17th century. What you have is people knowing people who know something that is of interest. And so it's just a question of using your own network. Familial network, religious network, professional network to gather information and get it back to London. So sometimes to have that, either you send someone to be part of the network of the milieu where you want to get information, which was the kind with John Cecil, or you try to use someone who is already in a good position, and but it's not someone that you're going to, it's not a professional spy, it's just someone who is spying for you. And sometimes spying is just giving information to someone who is going to use it against you, even if you don't know it. So the fact that he was sending information in England just to let know about what was happening in France, etc., that might be true, and that must also be true because of the Jansenist issue. There was a huge debate, and the relationship with the crown, the French crown, was really really difficult. So maybe he was just sending information, explaining what was going on, and that's enough to be of interest for the master spy in London. But it doesn't mean that he was a spy. It means that he was a source of information for the master spy in London. It's not the same.
Yeah, of course. It's completely different type of spying. So could you tell us maybe a bit more? So the game begins in 1643. And so who is the head of England at the time? And also a bit more about these master spies, please.
After 1641, Charles I was beheaded, and you have a small period of time when you have a republic in England, and the head of the republic is Oliver Cromwell, and the one who destroyed so many castles in Ireland. It's the same one, and he was moved by religious issues as well as political issues, and because he was a Protestant, because he was it was a republic. Obviously, he was at war with a huge part of Europe. And when you are at war with all your neighbors, you need spying. And so that's the reason why, on the tradition that Elizabeth I had created, he had a special office next to him where they could collect information about all that was going on all the royalists that were, or the Catholic that were in exile on the continent. And some of these royalists and some of the Catholic were at the French court. So it was interesting for them to have people close to the court of France that could just tell them what was going on, if there were projects to invade England or things like that. So once again, you see the difference, which is they were not asking for clandestine information. They were just asking for what's going on, and what's going on was of huge interest when it comes to what is the French of kind thinking King of France thinking of doing to run the Republic of England.
I think, however, even today, this kind of information will still be considered very interesting. If you think about current world leaders, I think a lot of people will pay a lot to know what are their intention or in terms of military and stuff like that. So yeah, that makes perfect sense, that it was useful at the time. And so it was, as you said, mostly spying on the Catholics. Were they also interested in the conflicts? I think probably before, but there was a war between Spain and England.
No, the war against Spain and England was earlier on.
Yes,
it was during the time of Elizabeth I,
yes.
and that's where you have the huge episode of the Great Armada.
Yes.
And after that, you have a period of quiet, and then on the continent, you have the beginning of what we call the 30 Years' War. But during the 30 Years' War, France and Spain were at war. And for a period, there's even been a period of time during Mazarin where the French king would have been interested to make peace with Cromwell against Spain.
Okay.
Which actually did not happen. So Spain and England always were at war, but sometimes England and France could just get along together because of the the motto, the enemy of my enemy can be my friend.
Yeah, always. Yeah, of course. That something changed a lot, something didn't.
And that's one of the things that the Jansenists couldn't allow, and that's one of the reasons why they were against French international politics. They thought that whatever the diplomatic or political reason could be, there were no way that a French king could leave the alliance with Spain, the Catholic Spain, to get allied with Protestant Republic. And Richelieu and then Mazarin at some point became allied with Cromwell, and that's the reason why some of the people at Port-Royal were against that politics. And one of the characteristics of the people of Port-Royal is when they thought something, they told it, which during the Ancien Régime was not always very safe, you see. And that's one of the reasons why the French king and the court became quite suspicious of what was going on in Port-Royal, because you have these people who have a very special turn of mind that don't agree with the way politics is led by the king, and they just say it. So that's a lot for the same people, you see.
Yeah, and also according to what says Sylvain, they welcomed a lot of weird people there. So you have in the Messieurs, So the messieurs are the men that go to isolate themselves from the world and be in the wilderness in Port-Royal. And so among them, so you will have this grandson of a British spy. You will have the nephew of the abbess, who used to be supposedly French greatest lawyer by the time. You will have former military men, also great scientists.
You had a lot and very different kind of people. But also you have to remember that we like categories, and in 17th century that's not the way the world goes, because by the time you could be at some point very close to the court, and at some point just to be exiled from the court, and then even under persecution. And that's exactly what happened to Port-Royal, because according to the moment in the 17th century, there were times when they were really close to the court. And by example, one of the gardener, Robert d'Andilly, who was also a poet but also a scholar, had been part of royal administration, and his own son Pompon became one of the ministers of Louis XIV. So the idea that everything has to be in a frame is absolutely not the way things happen in 17th century. So you have people that belong to aristocratic milieu, and because of that, at some point they can be against the king, especially during what we call la Fronde, which was an aristocratic movement of refusing the way the King of France was starting to create what we call absolutism, which is a central power. So you had all these people where absolutely not forgiving the power to people, but they were against having all the power given to the king, which the alternative being still having the power at their own level, you see. But all these aristocrats, when they were at war, they were under persecution by the king, and when things were getting better, they were close to the court, and they could be really even very courtesan to the king, you see. And that's exactly what happened in Port-Royal, because Robert d'Andilly at some point had to get to his son estates far from Port-Royal. But when he came back to Port-Royal, he went to Versailles, because at that point the court of France was in Versailles, to give them fruit from the orchards of Port-Royal. So that might seem strange, but that's the way things are never simple in 17th
it's a bit more fluid, maybe, that we can see. And Robert is going to be one of the I will say main non-playable character in the game. So the main character is purely fictional, didn't existed because we wanted more freedom with her, because the player has some freedom obviously, but for the non-playable character we have a majority of historical ones. Obviously what they say we all have invented based on what we know from them, but sometimes with some freedom, obviously. But yeah, Robert Arnaud d'Andilly is quite interesting. I think I didn't mention it in the newsletter yet, so just as a few small introduction, he was a really important court member that really dramatically said that he was going to be alone in the wilderness, and he was really well known for planting so many pears. I think supposedly there was 400 different type of pears that he planted, and calling himself the superintendent of Port-Royal. So still important person wherever you go, even if it was supposed to go there to be humble. So.
And once again, it's interesting because the Jansénists in Port-Royal, where they were the very pike of the Catholicism and Catholic Reformation, and yet d'Andilly had learned how to take care of fruits and in the south with Protestants. And the techniques that he introduced in Port-Royal were later taken in Versailles. So you have techniques of gardening techniques in Versailles that through Port-Royal are coming from the Protestant of south of France, and that's very specific. One of the things I like about the your choice of having this girl at the heart of the game is that the memory of Port-Royal is always, or for a long time at least, was all about the messieurs, the solitaires, etc. And sometimes they forgot that actually the abbey was a woman's abbey,
Yeah.
and that the abbots, especially Mère Angélique,
Yes.
Sister Mère Agnès, and their niece Mère Angélique de Saint-Jean, were strong women with a lot of power, a very social, a very strong social position, and also, especially Sœur Angélique de Saint-Jean, she also was a real scholar and very literate women. And all this is often forgotten. And you have everything about Blaise Pascal and Jean Racine, and all this is true. But the truth is that the women in Port-Royal, they were rather free, rather strong, and with strong will and strong mind. So I think it's very interesting to have a woman at the heart of your game.
Well, I think that too, so I'm happy. But yeah, so we see also the Abbess Angelique in the game. She's also one of the main NPC. Not she was not living there, so she's not
No,
presenting
no,
like that,
they.
but more like as a landlord, basically, because she was still the landlord, even if she was living in Paris. Obviously, it was farms to take care of because she was
To
earning
run.
revenue. So she's more in that position in the game, but she's still present because I think she's also a very interesting character, quite brave, also so strong in her face, determined, and not really interested in keeping the woman's role of the time, right?
That's interesting, yeah.
So I think that was a lot. Thank you so much. I think we're gonna
You're
stop
welcome.
there for today. Thank you again a lot for everything you said and you exchanged with me and with the people listening. I wanted to add something about the museum. So at the moment, it's closed for renovation. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. The museums really needed, as we say in English, love and care. So we're trying to give it all it needed, and it should be reopened this summer. The buildings themselves will be really renewed, and we had a lot of things to do on it, and but it's also the way the collections are put on display that is going to be changed.
Yeah.
We have decided to have something more modern and also maybe more pedagogic,
Yeah.
because for many people, as you said yourself, Port-Royal is not well known, and
Yeah.
when you come to the theological debates, it can be really tough to
Yeah. Yeah.
understand.
For
So
sure.
what we wanted is to have several levels of understanding in the museum. So even people who don't know much about Port-Royal, but simply have an interest for the place, it's better if you have an interest for history as well. But even if you just have an interest for the place, you can come, you have explanation that everybody should be able to understand, and then you can just pick up a few paintings that really you can relate to, and we will try to give just the explanation you need so that you are able to connect with what's on display on the museum. So I think that the museum, just like your game, is going to be a new experience on understanding Port-Royal.
Well, I will be very happy to visit it again because I obviously visited it before its renovation. So I will see it again when it's open. So the game is going to release a few months probably after the reopening of the museum. We are not 100% sure of the planning, but it will be during the autumn of this year too. So shortly after.
Well, we're all looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much
You're
and have a
welcome.
great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.